Okay, so welcome all to the 2023's first session of Sugin. Today we have Tamas with us, who is going to share his experience with Sitecore 10.2 Headless Next.js project. He's going to share his experience and the development flow while implementing his first headless projects. Tamas is a software architect at Alvin Informatics, Budapest, Hungary. He is working with Sitecore since 2014 and worked on 20 plus Sitecore projects. And he is technology MVP since 2018. So I'm handing over to you, Tamas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So today, in this session, I will talk about our experiences with Sitecore Headless. Basically, I want to share everything which we tackled in the last year on our first Sitecore Headless project with Next.js. And I would like to share with you different challenges we have been working on. So just a short introduction about me. So yes, I am Tamás Tárnok, software architect, a 5-time awarded Sitecore MVP, and quite active on Twitter and also on Slack. So this is my username, and also I also post some blog posts on my blog. Lately, mostly about Sitecore Headless and or Next.js. So let's just jump into the agenda first. I won't do any demo today, so it will be this presentation with some diagrams and sometimes with some code. But first, we will just have a short look on what headless CMS means, how is it compared to the traditional CMS, and then on the second part, we will just check what is headless in terms of Sitecore, and calling it now Sitecore Headless Services. And in this part, I will focus mostly on the server side part, so really the Sitecore .NET based implementation. And then in the third part, I will focus on the front end. So the Sitecore Next.js SDK, what Next.js is and what Sitecore provides us to make the development easy and fast. And in the last point, I will share some specific stories and how we did things on our first Sitecore Headless project. I won't mention the name of the project or the client. I try to be as abstract as possible. So let's jump into the headless CMS architecture overview. So in short, we have on the left side, we have the traditional CMS, and on the right side, the headless. And the traditional means basically like in the old Sitecore MVC world that the CMS, basically the CMS framework should run together with the front-end application like we did in the past with Sitecore MVC. So when we run Sitecore content delivery servers, you also have to basically deploy the code of the Sitecore framework to be able to use the APIs and everything. So here we had a basically direct connection from the server to the databases through the .NET APIs. And what differs in the headless world is that the API is separated. So these are not .NET based assemblies anymore to, for example, get some items or get layout about an item, but it runs through it's called layout service. So basically these are web APIs, and the web APIs are consumed by the different front-end applications. In our specific case, it's the Next.js application. So in this case, the of course, the front-end application is more lightweight than the traditional CMS front-end, because of course it doesn't have to include any .NET related code in our application. So let's jump to the next slide. So first, let's talk about the Sitecore headless services. What does it mean on the Sitecore content management and content delivery servers? So here I am talking about really the Sitecore servers. So the main part and the main feature and service which we used in our project was the layout service. It was released with the first version of Sitecore GSS. It's something like Sitecore maybe 9.2 or 1. And basically this is an API which is returning the presentation details of a page as a JSON. So when we compare the JSON with HTML, of course, JSON is more readable for programming languages, and it has a strict structure, and HTML doesn't have. So for programming languages, it's more easy to process JSON than HTML, of course, and it doesn't include any styling, for example, H1 or P tags or anything. It's really just the data provided, which we have in Sitecore. So just to have a look on an example layout service response. So the layout service is available on a specific endpoint, and the response is quite big, and it can be split into a few different parts. The first one we can see under the Sitecore root is the context. These are some global data which tells us if we are in editing mode or not, which site is it, and what is the page state, language, item path. So it's basically some basic data about our request. The next one is the root. The root means basically page. So these are the page level data when we request a page. And here we can see, of course, the name or the fields. Here I only have one field, which is called page title, and some other information about the page. And the next one, and probably the biggest one, is the placeholders. So it was under the root, and the placeholders is actually the presentation details of a page. And for example, here I have a GSS main placeholder which contains an array, and array means a list of components. So for example, inside GSS main, I have one component, it's called default layout. And inside this default layout, I have another two placeholders. The one is called GSS header, and the other one is called GSS content. And inside that, I also have an array, so a list of components. And here I have the header, and then I can see the data source fields. And also inside the GSS content, I just have one simple component. It's called text component. So this is basically the JSON representation of a page. And this is the response which is processed by for example, by the Next.js SDK automatically. And then it resolves all the placeholders and components. And basically what we have to do in the Next.js application is develop on a similar way, like in the MVC world. We are basically developing layouts and components. Yeah, so this is the two components. I just missed to press the space. And the next topic is it's so-called content resolvers. So content resolvers, you can think of like the controllers of an MVC application. So basically, they are responsible for the data. So for one component, what kind of data we want to deliver to the front end. Because in the Sitecore headless world, you have a different type of renderings. And instead of using or defining the controller, you can define the content resolver inside the Sitecore rendering item. Sitecore comes with a few built-in content resolvers. Here are all of them, and but you can develop your own. So these are really basic ones, like getting the context item back or getting the context item children back, or the other one is to get the data source item back or the data source item children's back. And these are the two which I didn't really use, but these are really useful also on a production environment. So just a small infrastructure, just to have a look on the infrastructure, what's the differences between a Sitecore headless project and a traditional one. So basically, when we were working on the traditional Sitecore solutions, what we just in a simple way, we had Sitecore content management. Of course, we had processing and Sitecore XConnect and everything else, maybe on a different servers, but just wanted to have a simple diagram here. And usually we have the Sitecore content delivery servers separated. So these are two separated servers. And in the past, that was it. But in the headless world, of course, we have to also deploy somewhere our front-end application, which shows the actual data of the content management server or the content delivery server. So for that, we have a separated Next.js content management server and a separated Next.js content delivery server or servers. We did this decision also on the project to have two separated front-end applications, one for content management and one for content delivery, because it's just easier to handle like this. Because usually content management servers are not publicly available, so it doesn't really have access probably to the internet, so it can't really access to the Next.js content delivery server. And the Next.js content delivery server, we don't want to connect to the content management server. So that's why we made the decision to have a separated one. And basically, the Next.js content management server is only used for the experience editor or the preview mode, but it's not. So this is only for editors, and this is the Next.js content delivery server is for the public audience. So let's have a look on the Next.js SDK. So this is the front end part of the Sitecore headless package. First, let's clarify what is Next.js. So Versa says who is actually developing Next.js. This is the React framework for production. They say it because they added basically a bunch of other features to the React framework with the Next.js. And the most important ones, I think, are these rendering methods that we can select basically which one we want to use. And different use cases need different selection. So let's just go through on these. So we have the server-side rendering. They usually reference it like SSR. which means the HTML, which is in the browser, is actually generated on the server side, on the server, like in a .NET MVC application. The next one is the static site generation, which has a similar logic between. So the static site generation and the incremental static generation is almost the same. This means basically that the pages and the HTML of one page is generated on publish time. So for example, when I change a page or a data source on a page, and if I publish that page, then the generation of the actual page is running on publish or after the publish and not on the request. So therefore we can have really, really fast sites because we don't really need a server to generate the HTML. We just need, I mean, in request time, we just need basically a file storage and then resolve the URLs and then return the HTML for those pages. But of course, it has the downside that, as the name says, it's a static. So this means you can't have any logic which is depending on the context of the request. So, for example, this could be a good use case if, for example, it's a newspaper or it's a news portal, basically, where every user sees the same content. And the last one is the client-side rendering, which, as it says, the HTML is not rendered on the server side, but it's rendered on the client side in the browser on request. So let's dive in what we have in the Sitecore Next.js SDK. Once we have the component factory, this is basically responsible for the Sitecore components and to resolve the Sitecore components. We have the placeholder resolver, which is, as it says, it's responsible for rendering the placeholders in the correct place and resolve the components inside the placeholder. The next one is the field helper components. So we have, or actually Sitecore provides some field helpers like a link or text or rich text or image components to be able to easily render the data in the HTML, which we get from the layout service JSON response. Then, of course, we have the layout service fetching and mapping. So we have to just configure some configuration in the Next.js application, and all the request handling and mapping the request results to objects is done by the Sitecore SDK. So we don't really need to care about this. It also has multi-language support. What is important here is that when you add the new language in Sitecore, you also add this language into the Next.js configuration. So it's not enough if we just add the language inside Sitecore and configure it. We also need to do it on the front-end application. The next one is the Sitecore Analytics and Experience Editor support. It's of course supported, so you get the same feature set as with a traditional Sitecore solution. And I will talk a bit about the Experience Editor setup later. And this also helped us a lot is the disconnected mode. This basically allows front-end developers to work with the Next.js application, with the Sitecore SDK, but without any connection to any Sitecore instance. Basically, we can work with mocked Sitecore layout service responses or mocked Sitecore pages. And then and then the front-end developer can use that. This is really useful when, for example, the Sitecore development is in parallel with the front-end, because we can easily work together and not blocking each other with this feature. I will also tell a bit more about this one, how we used it. So let's go and jump into the story of our first Sitecore Headless project. So the project features and requirements. This was our base, and we had to work from here. So the requirement was to finish and release the MVP in a short time frame. This means around 7-8 months with everything. So from the developer machine setup until go to production. And they already had an existing Sitecore 10.1, and there was a re-implementation of another site on MVC. So it's possible to have the Sitecore Headless project or Sitecore Headless site, and also a simple MVC site inside the same Sitecore instance. And we were the first one to introduce the headless technology with the client, and they wanted to use this. And just a bit of the domain of the project, it was a booking system to book different activities in some parks. So it was more like a single page application, rather than a static site. So this leads us, or this actually reduced the options we could choose from the Next.js rendering method. And what we also had to do is a lot of integration with other external services, booking, payment, and, for example, product information. So we also had the developers team setup. I just want to share with you how we set up the team. So we had 2 senior front-end developers. We had 1 senior Node.js developer. It was not related to Sitecore, the Node.js part. It was to create a wrapper API around those external services. And these were done in Azure Functions. And for that, we just used the Node.js as a language framework. And we had 2 senior Sitecore developers and 1 tech lead, mainly focusing on infrastructure and DevOps. So that's the team, I mean the technical team. And you can easily see that most of the team members were seniors. So I think it's really important to put senior or experienced developers on the first project with a new technology, because we can easily understand each other and actually also teach each other. So for example, as a Sitecore developer, I didn't know too much about the Next.js, but at the end of the project, I basically learned Next.js and TypeScript. So with the help of our front-end developers, and the other way around. So we, as Sitecore developers, we also had to teach the front-end developer how Sitecore works, what is the Next.js SDK in Sitecore, what is a placeholder, what is a component, what is an item. So all the basic stuffs, I had to explain them and teach them to know how to use the Next.js SDK, because front-end developers need to know how a page is built up. So the basic concept has to be clear for them. So let's start with the project in it. So it was like our maybe -1 sprint. So by discovering the initial requirements, it turned out that the layouts and the content won't be changed too frequently. It was really important information for us, because we know that so in Sitecore, usually what makes it it's harder and complicated is to break it down to different components and to make the components insertable basically to not any but most of the placeholders, so that the layout is not that strict. But in this case, it was strict. So basically, we just had a header, we had a footer, and between the header and footer, we had the content. But in the content placeholder, we most of the time had one or two components. So usually one component was one big component, for example, a checkout page, and it was easier to work with that because we didn't have to break down the forms and pages to different parts and think about how to work together. But this can be later changed. So for example, if later they want to split up the big components to smaller ones, they can do it easily. But for the first phase, for the MVP, it was not really important. So the functionality of the front end was higher priority than the editing experience. So the business logic was all happening on the front end, and the Node.js application and Sitecore and all the external services were bound together on the front end. So we didn't have any synchronization job to Sitecore because we needed real-time data or close to real-time data. So as I said, we started to use, yes, big components, and yeah, I already told all of this. So the next one was actually the first sprint, so the 0 sprint. And first we had to do a Sitecore upgrade because the current Sitecore version was on 10.1, but Next.js SDK supported since Sitecore 10.2. So this was just a minor upgrade. It was easy because they were already using Kubernetes and Docker for local development. So we basically had to just update the solution, and there were no really breaking changes, and also update the images. And then we also, so on the first sprint, we wanted to find out how we can work together. So we had this basically 3 teams. So we had the front-end team, the Sitecore team, and the Azure function team. And we found out to use the data mocks where possible. So we can resolve the dependencies pretty easily with mocks. So the plan was to actually, on the front end, they can mock the Sitecore responses with the disconnected mode, and they can also mock the third-party API responses with some mocks. For that, we needed some custom implementation, but with Next.js, it's pretty easy to mock APIs or create actually APIs and just put in a static JSON. And for that, we had to agree on, of course, on the response schema and the parameters which the API would agree or approve. And for that, we used Open API specification and also Sitecore YAML mocks. So for example, if the front-end developer wanted to work with some new mocks, what we did is to jump in a call and discuss the response schema, and then document it in an Open API specification. And then from there, the front-end developer could make his own mocks for every dependencies he was using. And yes, we also had to decide on which kind of rendering methods we would use, and we decided on to use server-side rendering. We couldn't use static site generation because basically every user should have seen different content, and we wanted to make most of the calls to the APIs hidden. So we made, or actually we chose the server-side rendering. So the next 6 sprint was quite interesting because we had a lot of features in our sprint, and everyone wanted to work independently. So basically, from the first day, we had blockers if we wouldn't use mocks, because the front-end developer was always depending on the back-end development and on the Sitecore development. But with the mocks, we could solve this. So what was happening is, in parallel, everyone, or actually every technical team, was working on his own own features and implementation. And at the end, we just had to switch some configuration to use real data instead of the mock data on the front end. So then on the end of the 6th sprint, or somewhere in the 6th or 7th sprint, we started to bind together the features. So this is where on the front end, we connected all the applications together, and from there we could start the QA process and the user acceptance. So the problem here was that basically until sprint 6, we couldn't finish with one story, because there was always too many dependencies and the priority was different on the back end and on the front end. So it was basically out of sync. But so this was not really good, because the client couldn't see any result for weeks. Or actually, we could show them how it works on the review meetings, and every team could show how different systems are working. But one feature was always a combination of some front-end development, some back-end, and some Sitecore. So at the end, we bound these together, and then we could start the testing and the user acceptance testing. So in the next few sprints, we started to, of course, bind the key features together and start the testing. And of course, there were some user journeys and use cases we didn't count on. So we had to do, some bug fixes, but I would say these were all minor fixes compared to the main focus of the application. So what was really important for us is, in the first 6 sprints, we had to finish with as it was a booking system. What is important for us is that the user could log in, the user can select some products, put it in the basket, go to checkout, pay, and check the ordered products. And this was the user journey we actually covered in the first 6 sprints. And because of the mocks, there were some use cases which wasn't handled well enough. So most of the time it was, yes, a bug fixing, and then the QA was coming in. And yeah, we got, I think in the next sprint, quite a few bug fixes. But still it was easier to fix those, and then we could pass most of the features to the user acceptance testing. And in the last sprints, there were the performance and penetration testing, and it was done by an external company, of course. And the external services were quite slow, but these were all black boxes or used by other systems, and we couldn't simply do any changes in those. So what we found out is that we do a really hard caching. in the front end. So in the Next.js application, we actually put in Redis cache, and in the Redis cache, we stored all the API responses from the external APIs, which were slow, for a very short time frame, like 5 minutes. And then basically once we have the cached responses in the Redis cache, it doesn't need the APIs anymore. So we use this 5-minute caching or TTL, time to leave, because there were also some prices, but the prices does not change too much. And also the capacity and some other properties are changing or could change in the background. So the 5-minute is quite a short limit of caching, but it was still good enough because an actual user journey was not usually more than 5 minutes. Because on a page like this, what you do is just to go there, search, put it in the basket and pay, and you exit the site. And for this, we used the Node Redis package. This is quite good, and it was good enough for us to use. It was easy to integrate. So let's talk about the infrastructure a bit. I already talked about this one a bit in the beginning, but what we had basically, oops, just a moment. So what we had is, let's start from here. So in the right side, we have these are not Docker, but Kubernetes services. And here we had the content management server and the content delivery. And the content delivery, or actually these servers were connected to the app service. This is the content management servers, and it says low traffic because it's only needed for Experience Editor. And here we have one for the content delivery. It's called website for the public website. And for this, we had the caching turned on. And for the content management, we didn't use any caching. And then these were connected to Cloudflare. And yeah, and these are the users who could hit the site. We also had some Content Hub integration on the content management server to import some images to products, or actually not images, but the URLs of the images. And then these images have been served for the end user by Content Hub. So the learnings we had and the problems we have tackled. So I think one is really important, which is actually the last point here, is the Experience Editor support is there for Next.js, and it's not that complicated. You just need some time to understand how that works. So basically what it does is, because in the old GSS version, you had to run a node server inside in an integrated mode inside the content management server. But in case of using Next.js, you don't need this. So you have a direct connection from the Sitecore to the Next.js application. It's basically an API connection that when you open the Experience Editor, then it runs a post request to the Next.js application to a specific API endpoint that basically tells to the Next.js application that please provide me this page in an Experience Editor mode. And then the Next.js application is returning back with the page and with all the extra HTML you need around, the components and placeholders to be able to edit the page inside the Experience Editor. So what does this mean? That you actually need connection in two ways. So you need a connection from Sitecore to Next.js and the connection from Next.js to Sitecore. And we had problems with it to set this up. For example, one problem was the Cloudflare, because the content management was also using Cloudflare in the background, and Cloudflare was doing some security checks, and some of the requests has been aborted because, I don't know, some rules were true, and it basically disabled the requests from the Next.js application to Sitecore. So be aware of that the network connection is a key point here when you connect basically Sitecore Experience Editor with the Next.js application. So another learnings were that the implementation were faster and comfortable if every team using its own tech stack without limitations. So I meant here mainly for the Next.js. So Next.js is a framework which is quite popular since, I don't know, since in the couple of last years, and front-end developers know most of the time what is Next.js, and if they don't, they most probably know React, and from React you can start to learn also Next.js. And yeah, you could have, if you know already Sitecore Headless, you could have asked yourself why we didn't use GraphQL. And the only reason why we didn't consider GraphQL is that it was all new to us. So for the whole team, Next.js was new, Headless was new, and it was already enough unknown technical frameworks and approaches we didn't use before. So putting in another one, which is not necessarily we need, would have increased the risk of not, or doing something wrong, or not finishing the project in time. So that's why we didn't use at that time. But as you probably heard, GraphQL is mostly the way to go with applications like this, because then it will be easily, it can be easily migrated to XM Cloud with the Experience Edge. And what was really important is the communication. It's not related to Sitecore, but the communication between the 2 or 3 teams, that the Sitecore, the front-end team and the back-end team works really closely together, because they are depending on each other. And yeah, that's it. I left some space for questions if you have any.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. So we have a few questions in chat window.
Okay, I see.
So yeah, if you can start going through those.
Cool. Just check. Okay, so the first question I found, Tamás, do you have an opinion on exposing dynamic content in layout service or Experience Edge? For static content, we are sorted, but for something dynamic where we want to call some third-party API and show them on the page, because Experience Edge is just a snapshot of the layout service. And if we customize our layout service and make dynamic content available there, it will be cache and we don't. Yeah, I get the point. So have an app without Experience Edge and use a traditional CD. This is a good question. So yes, we didn't use Experience Edge, but I just mentioned the end. Yeah, so I don't see any other option than, I mean, if we are talking about Sitecore and not XM Cloud, where you can also have another CD without the Experience Edge, I think that could be a good way to solve this problem. And yeah, I think I don't have any other option in my mind, because yes, so Edge is basically for static content, and this content delivery servers can be used to have, yeah, not for static content. I mean, another option could be that you store all the to store the set of data you can show on the front end, and you move the logic of what to show to the front end instead of the Sitecore content delivery servers. So for example, I don't know, if you have something like a list and you just want to show the subset of the list for some users, that logic can be moved to the front end. But there is no like a gold bullet for everything. So you really need to consider how much data is it, and is it worth to do it on the front end.
Yeah. So thank you, Thomas, for the answer and taking time for it. So my understanding is that, can we say that if you want to use Experience Edge, that means you can only use it for your static site, data source driven site, a simple SPA, with a couple of pages. But if you have something, like a login flow where, things are coming from different places. So that means, because Experience Edge does not know about those content, you will need some tweak, or maybe hook your next app to something else like via CD and, read those items and put it, display it on the site. That's the only way. But can we say that, okay, for static site only Experience Edge can be used? If you have something else, that means you need to sit on the table and think about some other approaches as well. Can we say that? Yeah,
I also have the same opinion. Yes. So I don't know any way to have the Experience Edge for a dynamic. I mean, when we say dynamic, it's something based on the current request. Yeah. And not the same for all users. But yeah, so you can, so if you have the whole set of content which you, for example, you can show for the users, then you can move this logic to the front end. So you can filter out or change, but it just works for a few cases and not for all, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. And of course, I'll give chance to other people as well, because I did not ask that, but I'll take a quick time to ask you. Was there any reason not to consider XM? And because, as you mentioned, you also have Sitecore analytics and everything. So you are on XP, right? You don't have XM?
Yes. So yeah, so it was on XP. Actually, we didn't use on this site. We didn't use any XP features, but on the other website, which was using MVC, they were using XP features. So Sitecore was there before our projects, so we just had to use what they have. We didn't sell them the actual Sitecore license and offer them what kind of Sitecore they need. So it was already there, and we just used the Sitecore XP, because this was not the main website we implemented. It was another subdomain, basically.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas.
Well, thank you for the questions. So the next one is from Vignesh. Can please give some snapshots for Sitecore Next.js debugging? Good question. So you mean local debugging or something which is already in production? Because I missed one point. We actually deployed our application to Azure. So the Next.js application was also running in Azure. and it was running in a Docker image, and in an app service Docker image, and we used application insights for analytics or analyzing batch requests and things like that. If you mean local debugging, I don't know too much about it. I am not really a front-end dev, but as far as I know, the basic TypeScript and debugging, TypeScript and JavaScript debugging methods can work. Is it something answers your question, or?
Yeah, it answered the question.
Okay, thank you. So next one, how does Site handle course-based challenges? Is there any context resolver for that? How does Sitecore be linked to multiple clouds, multiple features to fetch data from there or perform an event-based execution on a Sitecore page? Okay, so let's handle the first one. Yeah, so the course challenges, it has been done all in Azure. So we had the course configuration set up inside Azure. So it was all handling that. I'm not sure what do you mean by, is there any context resolver for that?
Is there any library that is handling this issue was my question, but you already answered that Azure was doing that.
Yeah, so in this case, yes, we used Azure, and there we used the course configurations. Okay, let me read this one. So how does Sitecore be linked to multiple clouds, multiple features to fetch data from there or perform event-based execution on a Sitecore page? Okay, so what we did here is that we had some product pages, or let's say extra product information inside Sitecore. And what we did is what we synchronized is only the IDs of the product, but nothing more. So we actually could bind together content from different sources based on the ID from the front end. So what happened is that there was a request from the browser, the page, for example, for a product page. And then Sitecore was resolving that layout. But there we had a wildcard item. So the layout was the same for all the products. But most of the product information was fetched in the Next.js application from a different API. So basically Sitecore was, let's say, for a product page, was responsible for the layout, but not for the data. So the data was coming from the different systems, and this was easily resolved by first fetching the Sitecore page. We get the ID of the product, and then there was another request for the third-party APIs to get the product information and the price and so on. So we try to synchronize or actually import less data as possible to Sitecore.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any particular reason or use case to have separate Next.js CML file it can reside on the Sitecore CM server itself? Yeah, so if you host this on an on-premise environment, it can be on the same server. I just try to separate logically the servers, but yeah, it can run on the same server, of course. But inside the Azure Azure Kubernetes, it was easier for us just to have basically a copy of the content delivery Next.js app and then use that. rather than writing another kind of deployment process to deploy inside the Kubernetes.
All right, makes sense. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry. What was the role? Okay, so what was the role of Sitecore devs? Like in traditional, they develop templates, renderings, items, and layout, presentation details. So how it happens in Headless? Yeah, so basically inside Sitecore, as a Sitecore developer, I did the templates, the renderings, and all the stuff which we had to do before. The only thing which was not done by me is the actual implementation of the component in .NET, and this was moved to the Next.js. But in some cases, we had to do some custom content resolvers, or basically helping and learning also the Next.js. So I see some transition between, I mean, from the .NET MVC to the Next.js world. I think it's good to understand if you don't want to be a front-end developer, it's still really good to understand how things are working on the front end. Because if you check and compare with an MVC project, it's really similar. So it has the same kind of logic, how components are matched together. So for example, components in a placeholder are rendered based on the component name. And we have a similar field helpers there and so on. So the only difference is really just the language. And I would say don't be afraid to learn another language if you have a chance on a project, because it really helps to. It's also nice to work with Next.js because it's pretty fast. So it's really, you can really work fast because you don't really have to worry about deployment on your local environment. You can just save the file and the changes directly there in the browser, and you don't even need Sitecore. So yeah, definitely for a Sitecore dev, it was less work, but at least I had the chance to learn Next.js. And still, we can still focus on experience editor features or any extra features which are not component related. Okay, the next question is, what was the requirements for considering GraphQL? And if you didn't use it, what out of the box service satisfied the requirements? Yeah, so the GraphQL would have been good to not implement our own content resolvers. So instead of content resolvers, we could use just GraphQL queries. We just felt more comfortable with content resolvers because there we have the full control of what we are doing and on performance. So we were just afraid. And GraphQL is good, really good when you really move to Experience Edge and or XM Cloud, because there you have better options with GraphQL than the layout service. Okay, there's one more question at least. I'm not sure how many time we have. I can see 3 more questions. I didn't answer yet.
Yes, we have 3 more questions, but we are already on time.
I can answer this if you want, or I can just write my answer also in the chat.
Yeah, if you are fine, we can spend 5 more minutes to answer these questions. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So so the query is, how do we enable endpoint in Sitecore.js's Next.js? So you mean how to create a custom API endpoint in Next?
Correct.
Yes. So Next.js has the has a feature which is basically resolving APIs, and not just APIs, but basically any endpoint by the folder structure. So inside your Next.js application, you have a folder called pages. And under the pages, if you create a TypeScript file, that will be an endpoint. And in the TypeScript file, you can basically respond with any kind of response. So it's really easy. So you can just search for it. Yeah, I didn't prepare any demo, but I could also show that. But it's really easy.
Okay, thank you so much. And so my another query is like
this one, the SSL certification.
Correct.
Yeah. So how to disable SSL certification validation? So you mean from the Next.js to Sitecore?
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's a node level setting. You can only for local development you can disable this. I think it's called. I can search for it. Just a moment.
Yes, can you go?
So in the environment file, if you put, where is it? Oh, yeah, this. I will just copy in the chat. Where is the chat? So if you put this line into the environment file, you can disable.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. But never deploy this to production.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
So okay, there's one more.
One more question.
Yes. If we are not using GraphQL, then how can we fetch data from Sitecore, which is not in the current context of the layout service? Not available in the current context of the layout service. I'm not sure if I get the question.
Hi. Okay. So suppose we are on a page and it has 10 renderings, and so the layout service will give the data for the 10 renderings, right? But suppose there is a 11th module which is not available in the rendering, but we want to get that data from the Sitecore tree, somewhere from the Sitecore tree. But how can we get it? Like if we are not using GraphQL?
Okay. So if you're not using GraphQL, then you can use or create custom content resolvers. So these are the default ones. Oops. These are the default ones, but you can create your own in .NET. So in C# you can program to get any kind of data for rendering. These are just the default ones, but yeah, if you need from any kind of resource or in a different path from different paths from the content tree, you can do it by creating content resolver. And Sitecore also has a nice documentation of how to implement these. So
So we have to build it like we have to write some code to just build this resolvers, right?
Yes.
But the GraphQL comes as a default in JSS, right?
Yes.
So what is the advantage? Like we just have to put a query in GraphQL, right? And it will give the data. And for this one, we have to write for each of our use cases, we'll have to write some resolvers, then we'll get data. So what is the advantage of doing this?
Okay, so so there is no advantage of doing or using content resolvers.
Yes.
It's always better to use GraphQL. If you,
okay.
I think I'm not really familiar with GraphQL, but I think there are some limitations. So what you can do with the query. So maybe if you can't do with the GraphQL query, I'm not sure what's that, but then with the content resolver, you can do that because that's .NET. So
yes,
you can do anything you want. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
But definitely, GraphQL is something to use rather than content resolvers.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, then that was all. Thank you for the many questions. I love when I get questions, so it's nice to present.
Yep. So thank you, Thomas, for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you all for joining Sugin webinar. See you all in next time. Thank you so much.